The first time I listened to this album, I actually didn't like it. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in this video I'm going to be ranking every album from the American rock band Chevelle. Chevelle is a band that I'm fairly new to. I haven't really heard much of their stuff up until their newest album, Niratias, came out earlier this year. But Niratias, I really enjoyed it. It had a great sound to it. It made me really want to go back and dive deeper into Chevelle's whole discography and see what sounds their other albums embrace, because Niratias I thought was done pretty well. So I figured I would go back, listen to all their albums, and then just do this little ranking video, and yeah, we'll see which Chevelle album ends up being my favorite. Alright, so we've got my ranking system pulled up. A+ are what I think are Chevelle's perfect albums. A's are going to be the albums that are so close to perfect, just maybe missing something here and there. B's are solid albums right in the middle. C's are kind of the forgettable albums, and then D's are my least favorites. So for this ranking, I'm going to go in order of these albums from when they were released, so oldest to newest. That means we are starting out with Chevelle's 1999 album, Point Number 1, and this was the first Chevelle album that I went back and listened to after hearing Niratias, and it's quite different for sure. Point Number 1 is definitely a lot more, I guess you could say, just acoustic sounding, more simplistic. For me, Point Number 1 definitely picks up more toward the end of the album. The beginning of this one just never really captured my attention or interest, and as much as I love the energy and aggression and kind of that raw acoustic quality to Point Number 1, it's just definitely not a standout. I don't think it is Chevelle's best work. There's definitely some tracks on Point Number 1 that I like. There are some tracks though on this album that I'm not into. One of those is Pier. I just really didn't get into this one at all. And overall, I'm just kind of torn on Point Number 1. I'm not saying it's a bad album, but in the context of Chevelle's other work, I think I'm going to put Point Number 1 in D. Up next is going to be Wonder What's Next. This is Chevelle's 2002 album. It's just got a denser quality to the sound than Point Number 1. There's less of that acoustic airiness to it, which I really like. That kind of weightiness I like to Chevelle's music. I think it's very appealing to listen to. Wonder What's Next definitely has kind of just this underlying sinister, menacing tone that fused with the dark quality of this album. I think it makes for a really great sound. The Red is one of my favorite tracks on this one. Just the eerie vocals paired with the instrumentals, again with the whole menacing, sinister, darker undertones. This song is a great example of that. Don't Fake This is another favorite. Just the build up into the chorus is awesome. There just are a few tracks where it drags a little bit for me. One Lonely Visitor is kind of an example of this. It's a more acoustic, more reined in, and just kind of a forgettable moment on this album for me personally. But overall, I think Wonder What's Next is a great step up from Point Number 1. I don't know if I would quite put this one in A. Like I said, there's some tracks it loses me a little bit, but I feel pretty good putting Wonder What's Next in B. I think I'm going to put it right there. Up next is Chevelle's 2004 album, This Type of Thinking Could Do Us In. This one is so difficult for me to rank. The first time I listened to this album, I actually didn't like it. I know it's like a classic Chevelle album that everyone seems to really love, and I didn't get into it. I was like, what is the hype all about? I didn't hate it, but it just didn't really stand out to me. And then I just kept going back to it for some reason, and upon re-listening to it several times, I started to love this album, and it really grew on me. It kind of has a similar quality to their second album. It's a little bit darker, more menacing, but it's also pulled in a little bit. It's more restrained. There's kind of almost a melodic, depressive tone to this album. The Clincher as the opening track, this is one of my favorites on this album. It just has such a cool sound to it, and again with that sinister quality. It's kind of a restrained track, but yet there's like this energy building up. You can sense it. Vitamin R, of course, is a classic Chevelle track. I really like the vocals on this one. They're a little bit higher. Emotional Drought is another favorite on this album for me, with the seething tones. It's just got a great energetic delivery to it. But again, kind of like Wonder What's Next, there's just a couple tracks where it loses steam a tiny little bit. One of these for me is Panic Prone. I didn't really get into this one. Again, it's a more restrained, stripped back, almost acoustic sounding track, and it just didn't grab my attention. I wanted it to, but it never did. However, I do think this album is better put together than Wonder What's Next. The tracks do flow really well. I feel like this type of thinking probably should go in A. It's amazing because, like I said, when I first listened to this album, I really didn't get into it, and it has grown on me so much upon re-listening to it. Up next is Vena Sera. This one came out in 2007. This one's got a great energetic delivery to it, and especially compared to their previous album, This Type of Thinking, they kind of pull themselves out of that quieter, menacing, you could almost say at times depressing sound, and they just throw a little more impact on there with the delivery of this one. There's just a great intensity to the instrumentals and vocals, and I do love that about this album. However, it never really grabbed my attention. Every time I listen to Vena Sera, I like it, I enjoy it. There's definitely some tracks on it I like, but it just never really grabs me at any point. Like the track Anti-Saint is really cool. I like it. It's kind of repetitive though, and that whole sound is continued through the album, and it kind of just makes all of the tracks blend together, which again, it makes for a good album. It's very cohesive, but it's kind of one note at the same time. The track I Get It is kind of interesting. It's got a little more energy on the chorus, and it almost has like a country western sound to it at times. And then In Debt to the Earth is a pretty cool ending track, just a great energetic delivery, really impactful right as the album comes to a close. But overall, Vena Sera, I just wanted something more from this album, and I never got it. I don't know if that's popular opinion or not, but I didn't really get into this one, so I think I'm going to put it in C. It is better than point number 1. Just kind of forgettable. I don't know, it's not one I go back to very often. There's not really any tracks on it that compel me to go listen to them. Up next is Chevelle's 2009 album Sci-Fi Crimes. This one is super cohesive, fantastic sound to it. Ultimately, Sci-Fi Crimes is what I wanted Vena Sera to be. They kind of took those similar sounds and more of that energetic delivery that Vena Sera has, but they infused it with just a little bit more variety in the sound, where it changes it up just enough from track to track, where I just found it really compelling and entertaining to listen to. Sleep Apnea is a fantastic start to this album. This one builds up so well. It's just seething and menacing, and it really puts you on edge. The track Jars is one of my favorites. The instrumentals on this one are fantastic. They pull in kind of that darker undertone that like This Type of Thinking really embraced, but there's more of an energetic delivery to it with the instrumentals. Fell Into Your Shoes is crazy. I love the guitar on this one. Just an awesome track. And then the closing track, This Circus, I think is my favorite track on Sci-Fi Crimes. This one is fantastic, and it just is a great ending to this album. I absolutely love this song. So ultimately, Sci-Fi Crimes, I think, is just extremely well put together. I love listening to it. Every track, I think, is great in its own unique way, but they flow really well. There are no skips on this album for me, and I feel very comfortable putting Sci-Fi Crimes in A+. I think it's a great album. Up next is Chevelle's album Hats Off to the Bull. This one came out in 2011, and this one is very clear sounding and sharp and precise. There's less of that explosive intensity that Vena Sera and Sci-Fi Crimes had, and there's also not as much of that seething, dark, depressing sound that This Type of Thinking had. There's just a great simplistic delivery on the instrumentals on this album. It's very sharp and effective, and I like that sound for Chevelle. I think it's pretty cool. Overall, I really enjoyed this album. The Meddler is a great track that kind of embraces some sound effects, but they keep it more restrained. There's definitely a lot of tracks on Hats Off to the Bull where I will start listening to them and I just won't really know what to think. I won't dislike it, but I won't like it either. And then as the track progresses, I tend to kind of get into it a little bit more. Envy is kind of an example of this. At times, this song was a little bit draggy for me, but then at other points, I really liked it. And the title track, Hats Off to the Bull, is yet another example of this. By the end of this track, I was really into it, but at the start, I was very unsure of its sound. I didn't know if I was gonna like it or not. The track Prima Donna, I liked the acoustic flair that this track has, but I just found his vocals on this one to almost sound whiny. I just kind of was off-putting to listen to. But overall, I think Hats Off to the Bull is a really well-crafted album. I like the overall sound that Chevelle embraced with this one, so I feel pretty comfortable, I think, putting Hats Off to the Bull in B. I would rank it below Wonder What's Next, though. Up next is La Gárgola. This one came out in 2014. I love the really dark, almost industrial side of their sound that Chevelle kind of embraces on this album. It is just fantastic from start to end. I think the production on this album is really cool too. There's just a lot of dynamics going on with this one, with really quiet, restrained moments and then loud outbursts of energy. But then throughout the whole album, there's just this really dark tone that never changes. Even though the sounds on the tracks will change, that tone is always there. Ouija Board as the opening track is really cool, how it starts with those bell sounds. It's like right off the start, there's just this really creepy, dark atmosphere that they create with the sound, and it just kind of, like I said, they pull that through the whole album fantastically well. Jawbreaker is seething with this energy, and then it just explodes into sound. I think this one is just a fantastic, energetic delivery on this album. And my favorite track on La Gárgola is the ending track, Twinge. This one, again, it embraces some almost industrial sounds at certain points. It's a little bit slower and more melodic, but there's this underlying almost creepy atmosphere to it. This album, I think, is fantastic. The sound of it is amazing, and it is just so well put together from start to finish. Definitely a standout for me, and I feel very, very comfortable putting La Gárgola in A+, right at the top, above Sci-Fi Crimes. Up next is Chevelle's 2016 album, The North Corridor. This one definitely goes in a slightly more raw, kind of gritty sound. They kind of explore like this sort of unpolished side to their sound, which is cool. I liked it. I just didn't find this album to be all that enthralling to listen to. I'm just really surprised overall for how much energy they seem to throw on this album. It just never really captured my attention. I do think the track Joyride is pretty cool. I like the sound effects with the really intense vocals going on. But overall, this album just, I found to be kind of forgettable, not really a standout for me. So ultimately, I think I'm gonna put The North Corridor in C, and I think I'm going to put it below Vena Sera. Alright, and last up we have Niratias. This is Chevelle's most recent album, and it was released this year actually, in 2021. This album I think is pretty fantastic. I definitely enjoyed the sound of it. I think they did a really great job pairing kind of like the heavier, obtuse sounding guitar and instrumentals with very streamlined, futuristic vocals and sound effects. It's very interesting to listen to. It's very cohesive. There are, at certain points, a few tracks that don't really capture my attention. For example, the track Test Test Enough. Again, we just get a little bit of like that whiny quality to the vocals. And also the track Endlessly was just a little bit forgettable for me. It kind of faded into the background. But overall, Niratias I think is pretty great. The track So Long Mother Earth is awesome. The chorus is just so satisfying. At times it gives off very strong Gojira vibes, and it just has this great guitar. Also the track Mars Simula is great with that menacing tone, again just bringing the energy. And the track Self-Destructor, I love that one. Those are probably my top 3 from Niratias. Overall, I think this album is pretty fantastic. There's just a couple like tiny brief moments on it where it doesn't quite fit for me. There's just something missing. I feel like B is a little too low, A is a little too high. I think ultimately I'm going to put Niratias at the very top of B. I like it better than Hats Off to the Bull and Wonder What's Next. Alright, there you have it. There's my ranking of all of Chevelle's albums in A+. So the albums that I think are just perfect, we have La Gárgola and Sci-Fi Crimes. In A, so pretty close to perfect, we have This Type of Thinking Could Do Us In. In B, so very solid albums, still really enjoyable to listen to, we have Niratias, Wonder What's Next, and Hats Off to the Bull. In C, which are kind of the forgettable albums for me, we have Vena Sera, and we have the North Corridor. And in D, which are my least favorites, we just have point number 1. So that is going to conclude my ranking of all of Chevelle's studio albums to date. I really enjoyed doing this video and doing a little deep dive into Chevelle's discography. I think they're a very talented band. All of these albums are fantastic in their own way, and this is just my personal ranking. Definitely let me know what your favorite Chevelle album is, and if you agree or disagree with my ranking, I would love to hear your thoughts on Chevelle's discography. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.